Yesterday was my parents' 75th wedding anniversary. Now, my students over the years would highly object to that dating of being 75 years ago, since they figure I was born in 1830 and all my white hair would indicate my parents have got married about 200 years ago, because I'm about 195. But the reality is that my parents made it 54 years before my father died, being married. They met while they were roller skating. It's kind of a fluke roller skating party in the neighborhood. My mom was a young country school teacher in a one-room country schoolhouse, the same one that my grandfather went to, my great-grandfather helped build, and actually the same one that I went to when I was young in a one-room country schoolhouse. My parents met each other at the roller skating party, and they struck up a friendship, and their courtship consisted of, from what I understand, 7 times they went to a nearby town to watch the movie called Gone with the Wind. And that became locked into their part of their courtship mindset. If we turn to Proverbs 30 and verse 18, Proverbs 30 and verse 18, I'm going to quote this in the King James Version of the Bible. There are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, yet 4 which I know not, meaning I don't understand. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock, and the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. Well, the way of a man with a maid is really quite a marvelous thing, and it's a challenge to understand. It's the marvel of the marital relationship that mirrors our relationship with God. Now, as mankind's knowledge increases over the years, we discover more and more about ourselves, and in so doing, we discover more and more about God. And then we look at the Bible and realize the knowledge was right there in front of us all the time. Well, doctors and researchers have discovered amazing things about the human body. They've discovered how it's built, its ability or capacity to heal itself, to reproduce, perform fantastic feats, whether it's running a marathon, swimming the English Channel, or climbing Mount Everest. My wife showed me a video of a runner who outdistanced the other gals that were running in the race, and right near the finish line, she fell. And she was ahead of the others, but she was formerly in gymnastics, so she rolled across the finish line in front of everybody else. The human capacity to perform is really quite remarkable. But the researchers have done more than physical research about humans. They've also researched about people's emotional makeup. And this explanation provides some information about why people do what they do. Now, it was 28 years ago. My wife and I were in a Crown Super bookstore in San Diego during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I spotted a book I'd heard about, but I hadn't read it. And you might have heard about the book too. It was on the New York Times bestseller list back then. And the book was entitled His Needs and Her Needs by Dr. Willard Harley. It's a book about marital relationships. And the book at that bookstore was on a special display on an end cap. And I was mildly curious. Men, aren't real digging deep into relationships. They're into action and adventure. But something struck my curiosity because the name of the author was vaguely familiar. And I thought I'd heard this name before. Well, I flipped open the book and I looked under the back cover, and there was a picture of the author. I thought, there's something familiar about this guy. I just couldn't place him. And then I read about the author. He was my college psychology professor. Boom. Now, his hair was whiter then. I had him when he had just finished his PhD and had him for Psychology 101. And he was quite young. I was younger then, too, for the record. And so when I discovered his book, it was entitled His Needs, Her Needs, and it opened my eyes to a new way of looking at myself and my wife and marriage in general. And frankly, it opened up a dimension in the Bible that I hadn't paid attention to. Now, Dr. Harley left his professorship at the college where I had graduated, and he went on to establish a chain of marriage counseling centers. But it bothered Dr. Harley, who was not able to help more couples be truly happy. And so he spent years understanding why marriage counselors almost universally failed at helping marriages. And it was awkward. It was embarrassing for him because who wants to have failure after failure after failure? So he did some research. In fact, I participated in some of his research in college, and this was years later. He did some research in this area that I'm going to share today. But I do want to make a special note here, put an asterisk in your notes. This message would never have been written if I had not been motivated by the discovery of my wife's flaws. Now, my wife is an outstanding person, and of course, ordinarily I would never mention any of her flaws, but it's only through marriage that these characteristics would be revealed. First, when my wife takes the glasses out of the dishwasher, she puts them upside down in the cupboard. She says that's to keep the dust out of the clean glasses. I, on the other hand, understand that the correct way to put the glasses in the cupboard is to put them is to open end up. That way any moisture can evaporate, it has the opportunity to evaporate. And then, when making the bed, I was surprised initially to find out that my wife pays no attention whatsoever as to which end the open end of the pillowcase goes, whether it's inside or outside. I just naturally assumed that everyone knew that the open end of the pillowcase would go to the outside of the bed. And then I found out about the toilet tissue roll, and my darling wife routinely installs the paper so it comes off the front side of the roll. And I patiently tried to explain to her that if you place the tissue so it comes on the back of the roll coming down, then children or a cat cannot just bat the tissue roll and it comes off in a pile on the floor. Well, after much discussion, we finally reached an accommodation in our lives, how to resolve the marital discord. Here's how we handle the differences. Whoever empties the dishwasher gets to decide how to put the glasses in the cupboard. Whoever makes the bed gets to decide which direction to place the pillowcases, the open end, and whoever replaces the toilet tissue roll gets to decide which way the paper should come off of the roll. Now, so we had to go through this, had to all learn the hard lessons like this, and I'm sure everybody here. And by the way, this isn't for just married people or people who are going to be married. The essence of this message is really about our marital relationship between us and Jesus Christ. So I do want us to bear that in mind, that as we follow this through. Now, Dr. Harley discovered the results of his research on emotional needs in marriage in his book, His Needs, Her Needs. But before we jump into the discoveries of human nature and the marital relationship, we want to turn to Genesis 1 to read about the first man and woman, the first marriage. In Genesis 1, verse 26, God said, "Let's make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing on the earth." So God created, verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, just to be sure that we didn't miss the point, that we were created in God's image, he repeated that in Genesis 5, starting in verse 1. In Genesis 5:1, "This is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them, male and female, blessed them, and called them mankind in the day they were created." So mankind was made after God's image, in his likeness, with the potential to have the characteristics of God. Well, today we're going to review the emotional needs of marriage, but to do that, we're going to examine the top 10 emotional needs of men and women, and as we do that, we're going to see how meeting our emotional needs corresponds with our relationship with God. You may title this message, "The Emotional Needs in Marriage." Today, this message can be heard on two levels. One is purely a human plane. Somebody can walk in the door and sit down and care nothing about religion and still walk away with knowledge that would be helpful in his or her marriage. And the other way that we could hear this message is to understand the spiritual analogy, how to have a better relationship with God, because we have a better relationship with what God expects of us. Now, Dr. Harley found that men and women, surprise, surprise, have the same top 10 emotional needs. However, what Dr. Harley discovered is the top 5 needs for men are different than the top 5 emotional needs for women. In other words, the priority of the emotional needs is different. Well, in order to understand our destiny, that God refers to his relationship with spiritual Israel as a marital relationship, we should know that Israel, spiritual Israel, is a bride awaiting her husband. In Isaiah 62 and verse 5, in the Common English Bible, Isaiah 62:5, we read, "As a young man marries a young woman, so your sons will marry you with the joy of a bridegroom because of his bride. So your God will rejoice because of you." And we read these types of references throughout the Bible, that God admonishes us to be faithful and faithful to him, to be faithful to the truth and not stray from the truth. And the powerful language that God uses for someone who forsakes the truth is the same language that describes someone who's unfaithful to their spouse. And it's pretty strong language. We can read that in Ezekiel 16, starting in verse 1, and go through the entire chapter, 63 verses, Ezekiel 16. And the chapter explains God's love for Israel and how Israel frequently spurned God's love to chase after other spiritual lovers, false gods, if you will, and how God equates physical fornication or adultery with spiritual fornication or adultery. So I'm going to go through the top 10 emotional needs for married people and how these points can help in our marriage or in our future marriage and our relationship with God. Now, the reason for studying about these things, top 10 emotional needs, because if the needs are not met, then we become candidates for unfaithfulness to our mates. And similarly, if God's expectations of us are not met, we become candidates for straying from God and the truth. So the top 5 emotional needs for wives, number 1 is affection. God created women. He knows that women need regular affection. And of course, men also need affection, but it's the highest emotional need for women. And men, unlike God, need a written reminder to love their wives. We can read that in Ephesians 5, verse 25. You see, they must give their wives the daily affection they need. Now, some men need a slight nudge to remember anniversaries and birthdays and special events. Other men need more than a nudge because a gentle hint doesn't work. In Ephesians 5:25, "Husband, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for us." Well, this need for wives to have affection is so profound that it often dominates their feelings and overwhelms or bypasses their other needs. Some women told me that their husbands are almost incorrigible in this area. It's almost to the point of tragedy because it's a woman's most important emotional needs. So the directive for husbands to show affection is so strong, it's repeated. Colossians 3 and verse 19 and Colossians 3:19. It's repeated when it says, "Husbands, love your wives, be not bitter against them." Now, after these 2 verses, I want to point out that it's not a very good idea for a woman to take these last 2 verses and use their Bible and bash the husband's head in with reminders to love them. The verses are for men to learn to understand and follow, not for their wives to use and skewer them as if they were meat and vegetables on a kebab stick. Now, it's hard for a man to be spontaneous if a wife asks him if he loves her. I'm reminded of the story of a fellow who had been married for many years, but he wasn't very expressive to his wife. She craved so much to hear the words, "I love you." She snuggled up to her husband and asked him that fateful question, "Honey, do you love me?" And the man held up his hand and he showed her his wedding ring and he said, "Remember when we got married and I said I loved you?" She says, "Yes." And she had great anticipation. He says, "Well, if I ever change my mind, I'll let you know." Well, according to Dr. Harley, and he didn't want to leave anything to chance, he developed a list of things to otherwise clueless men can do to show affection for their wives. And so he has a list, how to help clueless men. And I lettered them A through J, so you might just want to hang onto your hat and I'll zip right through them. Hug and kiss your wife every morning while you're still in bed. B, tell her you love her while you're having breakfast together. C, kiss her before you leave for work. D, call her during the day and see how she's doing. Texting works too nowadays. Bring her flowers once in a while as a surprise. Be sure to include a card that expresses your love for her. F, get a gift for her on special occasions. It should be sentimental, not practical. And then he puts these words, learn how to shop for a woman. This is probably one of the hardest things any man will ever have to do. Now, in economics class for years, I played a J.C. Penney commercial. And the J.C. Penney commercial was in the doghouse. And it showed a man buying a gift for his wife. He bought her a double-bagged vacuum cleaner, the finest on the market, and gave it to her for their anniversary. And he was thrown in the proverbial doghouse with all the other men who had gotten thoughtless wives for their gifts. They thought she would love it. And so it's a very entertaining series. There's the doghouse and Return to the Doghouse. Really what J.C. Penney was doing is trying to sell jewelry. But the commercial was interesting. Letter G, for clueless men. After work, call her before you leave for home so she can know when to expect you. Letter H, when you arrive home from work, give her a big hug and kiss. Spend a few minutes talking to her how her day went. Letter I, help with the dishes after dinner. And J, kiss her every night before you go to sleep. Well, just as affection is important in marriage, so Christ gave us the example of how he loves his bride, the church. Jesus Christ loved the church so much that he gave up his life for it. And despite our personal waywardness, Jesus Christ continues to remain true and steadfast for us. The most quoted verse, I believe, in the Bible is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes on him should not perish but have everlasting life. That was a level of sacrifice that Jesus Christ was willing to do for the church. Now, affection is a woman's most fundamental need, emotional need, and God provides that love for his affection and affection for the church. So husbands should model their behavior accordingly and show affection for their wives. The second most important need, emotional need for a woman, is conversation. Now, when a couple first meet and they begin to date, they just can't talk enough. Usually a courting couple will explore and seemingly talk about everything. They will explore the world with their conversations, and they get married and the conversation slows down to a crawl, almost a stop. I remember when courting my wife, we would trade questions, but we put a limit on it. We could only ask each other 3 questions per day because our curiosity was so great that we would ask lots and lots of things. And so we had to put a limit on it. But scientists have discovered a substance that causes men, once married, to stop talking to their wives. With research over millions of people in several generations, it can be revealed the offending substance that causes men to stop talking to their wives is wedding cake. Once men eat the wedding cake, it seems that their brain locks up, their vocal cords become practically inoperable. Now, some of you may have heard of the book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray. The author so accurately describes how men tend to clam up under duress, how they go into a cave primarily to reassess their situation, maybe lick their wounds. And while the man is in the cave, he's hurting, trying to figure out what to do, and he's recuperating. The wife comes into the cave and tries to drag him out by having a conversation with him. And of course, the man refuses and becomes resentful, and the man turns into a fire-breathing dragon, and then the wife feels burned. Surprise, surprise. It's quite the opposite. When a woman feels distressed, she gets on the telephone with her mother, her sister, her daughter, her friend, her neighbor, and discuss endlessly every little nuance of whatever the burden is that she's feeling. Although men don't share this emotional need to the degree for conversation at the same degree, men should understand that women need conversation. She thrives on it. It's her survival. Now, 40 years ago, my pastor, then pastor Leonard Scriber, told this story, and he said, imagine this situation. Man gets up, 4 a.m. Early in the morning, brews a pot of coffee, pours it in his thermos bottle, makes some sandwiches, goes out to the garage, gathers up his fishing gear. He places his fishing gear in the back of his pickup truck, drives across town to his buddy's house where the two of them hook up the boat trailer with the boat to the pickup truck. They toss all of the gear and cooler in the back of the pickup truck, and at 5 a.m. those two are off. They jump in the pickup. They're off to the lake, for a faraway lake, for a day of fishing. They arrive at the lake at 6 a.m. They unload the boat from the trailer. They remove their fishing gear and cooler from the pickup. They place it into the boat. One guy parks the pickup while the other guy holds the boat next to the shore. Both guys jump in the boat and they fish all day long. At the end of the day, the two guys reverse the process that they did that morning. They load the boat onto the trailer, toss their fishing gear back into the back of the pickup truck, and they head home. They unhook the trailer, sort out the fish, return to their respective homes. By the time that both guys arrive home, neither man has spoken a complete sentence to each other all day long. Grunts, shrugs, and occasional one-word question or reply. Key for the day is, now imagine two women doing the same thing. You see, that's a fundamental difference between men and women. Men don't see much unusual about the scenario. Most women cannot even imagine such a happening. Conversation doesn't only involve talking. In order for a woman to effectively pour her heart out to her husband, he must be willing to listen, to participate in the conversation. In Psalm 62, verse 8, we can read about how God listens to us. I have this in the Common English Bible, Psalm 62:8. All you people, trust in him at all times. Pour out your hearts before him. God is our refuge. A listening husband, after hearing his wife, will actually do something about whatever it is that concerns her. After all, God graciously performs for us what we diligently seek from him. In 1 John 5:14, we read, "Now this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." Well, just as wives thrive on conversations with their husbands, so do members of God's church thrive on keeping in close conversation with God. If we read in both Daniel 6 and verse 10 and verse 13, we read that Daniel, in verse 10, fell on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks to God. And it says, as was his custom since early days. In verse 13, he was then accused because he was making petitions to God 3 times a day. How many of us could be guilty of that accusation? Just as Daniel then kept in close contact with God by pouring his heart out to God 3 times a day, so we should maintain our daily conversation with God. Now, another biblical character, King David, he didn't limit himself to practicing 3 times a day. And we don't know that Daniel limited himself. We just know that was his habit. But King David, according to Psalm 119, 164, he said, 7 times a day I praise you because of your righteous judgments. King David was thankful in Psalm 119, 164. Well, King David was thankful and repeats 7 times a day. But how many of us even talk to our spouse 7 times a day, let alone talk to God 7 times a day? Conversation is critically important emotional need. Fortunately, many of us have now in the modern era text messages to help us facilitate conversations with our spouse. Dr. Harley, in his book His Needs, Her Needs, has conversation tips for husbands and wives, and we could go through those, but we would extend this message considerably longer. I can refer to the book on pages 69 and 70. The third emotional need for women is honesty and openness. Now, it's hard for some men to be open because they're less conversational and expressive. Yet this is one of the women's highest emotional needs. Remember that example from John Gray's book about men are from Mars, women are from Venus? Men tend to crawl in their caves. They aren't verbalizing or admitting difficulties. Women, on the other hand, tend to seek out other women with whom they can share. Now, most men won't admit they have physical ailments, even when they have a broken leg and the bone is protruding from the skin. So is it any wonder that women live on average 7 years longer than men? Statistics show, however, that married men live longer than single men, because married men have a woman to look after them. However, there's no difference in the lifespan of single women as compared to married women, because women take care of themselves better or have relationships with other women to take care of them. And of course, there are exceptions, but those are the statistical averages. Regarding health, it's tough for men to be honest with themselves and be less open and honest than with their wives regarding their own health. Many years ago, I was helping friends load household items into a moving van, and it was a hot day and it was sweaty work, and we wanted to be careful not to overdo the exertion. And one of the men with us, an older fellow, flopped over. He was unconscious. My heart was racing. I ran over to the body, slumped on the ground. His eyes were open, but when I waved my hand in front of it, it didn't look like he could see anything. And then he blinked, and he answered me and said he thought he'd be all right. Well, turns out he hadn't been feeling well for a few days, but he didn't want to worry his wife, so he had joined the guys in the moving party anyway. I called an ambulance and went out the street and flagged him down and sent him in, and they took him off to the hospital. Heat exhaustion. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Sharing your concerns and your needs with others is biblical. In James 5, verse 16, in James 5:16, I'll read in the King James Version, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. When they say faults or could mean shortcomings. Well, who better to share your burdens with than your closest human companion, your spouse? The fourth highest emotional need for women is the sense of security, financial support. The most remembered verse is in 1 Timothy 5:8. In 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. When we have our spiritual lives in order and seek God first, then God provides our physical needs. And we read that in Matthew 6:31. We don't have to worry about that, about what shall we eat, what shall we drink, what shall we wear. God knows these things, all the things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But first, seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. You see, God takes care of us. All we have to do is put our spiritual lives in order and then ask God to help us in supplying our needs. I'm reminded of the expression about, well, God will provide our needs, but we still have to lift the fork to our mouth. Okay, there are things that we have to do. If we read Matthew 6 in the model prayer, and starting in verse 9, in Matthew 6:9, in this manner, therefore, pray, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Verse 11, give us this day our daily bread. So, knowing that God the Father can and will provide, we still have to do our part, as it were, to lift the fork from the plate to our mouth, or do whatever we have to prepare our gift. It's the nature of God to supply his children with their needs. Just as man is made in the image of God, a man wants to follow God's example to supply bread to his family. And so God provides support to us. So we need to support those who are then unable to support themselves. And in Deuteronomy 24 and verse 19, when you reap your harvest in the field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shouldn't go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. And verse 20, when you beat your olive trees, don't go over it again. In other words, when you harvest for the later olives, it shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. When you gather grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. The principle here is you have to leave some for those who don't have the land or the produce for themselves. But you know what? They still have to go do something. They can't just sit and wait with an open mouth like a bird waiting for a mama bird going to drop the worm in it. No, it doesn't work that way. They have to put forth the effort in order to go out, pick up the sheaves, harvest the grain, collect the olives. They have to do what they can do. And we read in the book of Ruth in chapter 2 and verse 1 about Boaz, the future husband of Ruth. He took care of the widows that were his responsibility. And if we read in Ruth chapter 2, he was the one that was following those instructions and leaving the corners of the field. But then he spotted Ruth and says, drop a little extra for her. Well, we could see that he was sweet on her. The fifth thing, the women's emotional need, is family commitment. Every wife wants her husband to be a good father, but to be a good father, it takes effort. Now, I was extremely fortunate to have a wonderful father. My dad died over 20 years ago, but his constant continuing presence in the family life looms very large. Well, Dr. Harley, in his book His and Eternities, developed a list of the most commonly admired things in a father. And this, again, is A through J in the letters. Meals together as a family is A. B, going for walks or bike rides. Well, we had meals in the family at home on the farm. Going for walks and bike rides, that was actually tractor driving across the field doing the work. 3, attending religious services. Or C. D, conducting family meetings. E, playing board games together. F, attending sports or recreation events together. As a dairy farmer, we milk cows at 5:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. But in the spring, in March, when it was basketball tournament time, and the tournament game started at 6 o'clock, an hour away, for some reason, Dad was all done with chores, nearly done when we got off the school bus. We had to do a little bit and scramble, get ready, and off we went to those basketball games. And one year, I think our hometown made it to the 3rd place in the state. Reading to children before bedtime, helping the children with financial planning, helping the children with homework, family projects, that they are fun for the children, so that the projects, they aren't working on them all alone. We see our Heavenly Father does just that. He is our Father. In Matthew 6 and verse 9, as we read, in this manner therefore pray, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. And we're children of God the Father. In 1 John 3:1, behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called the children of God. In John 1:12, the book of John 1:12, just as many has received him, to them he gave the right to become the children of God, to those who believe in his name. And the third verse in this sequence in Romans 8:14, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. Well, God gave us, in Matthew, in the prayer, we ask God to give us this day our daily bread. Why would we bother praying to God if he was incapable of delivering? So the top 5 emotional needs for wives: affection, conversation, honesty and openness, financial support, and family commitment. But that's not the end of the story here, because there are 10 top emotional needs for humans. Now we have the top 5 emotional needs for husbands. And the first one is physical intimacy. In Genesis 2, in verse 18, in Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, it's not good that a man should be alone. I will make a helper comparable to him. And we read on that woman was taken and made from man. And Adam said in verse 25, the bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman. She was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Doesn't sound very complicated. Boy meets girl. Boy and girl fall in love. Boy and girl get married. They have children. The cycle of life starts over. I did mention that I had gone to country school when I was a lad, one-room country schoolhouse. And the little kids learn those little songs from the older kids. And there in first grade, I learned a song that you might have heard. Johnny and Susie sitting in a tree, Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, and along comes the baby carriage. Whoa, that's a little young to learn that, but I learned the process, the sequence of it. Nowadays, apparently they skip the whole marriage thing. But that was the process when we were young. For men, physical intimacy is their highest emotional need. They want their wives to be at one with them, just as the wife's highest emotional need is affection. And these two needs go hand in hand for optimal relationship. When husbands and wives strive to meet each other's top needs, then they're able to enjoy a more fulfilling relationship. And similarly, as we as church members should look at fulfilling the expectations of God to be at one with Him. In Ephesians 5, starting in verse 31, Ephesians 5:31. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. And of course, there's an annual holy day about being at one with God, and that would be in the fall on the Day of Atonement, also called Yom Kippur. It's being at one with God, a very close relationship. And God expects us to become at one with Him in Leviticus 23, starting in verse 26. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, the 10th day of this 7th month shall be the Day of Atonement, a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made to the Lord. And do no work in that day, for it's the Day of Atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. And it goes on to explain that it's a Sabbath, a solemn rest, and it's really drawing us together to be at one with God. And this at one-ment is so important that God set aside one of the annual holy days of the necessity to be at one with Him. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Philippi in Philippians 1, starting in verse 2, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. We had that sermonette recently about thinking like God, but let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. We should focus then on being at one with God. And if husbands and wives are at one with each other in conversation or emotional, and filling their emotional needs, and physical intimacy is a model of our relationship with God. The second emotional need for men is recreational companionship. And when a couple is courting and spending a lot of time together, the women may go hunting or fishing. A woman may go hunting or fishing with her husband or future husband, and they might go to a ball game together, sports things. He might be an enthusiast, perhaps golfing a time or two. Perhaps they play tennis. Whatever that recreational activity, she goes along because she wants to be close to him. And then she partakes of the wedding cake and her interest wanes in pursuing his sports and recreational interests. Now, years ago I attended a June wedding of one of the young men in the neighborhood where I grew up. His older brother is my tenant farmer that farms our farms. And that November it was deer hunting season, and the young man wanted to take his wife deer hunting. So he purchased all the gear for her. He bought her a hunting rifle. She dressed up in nice warm clothes for the November bitter cold that it could be in deer hunting season in Minnesota. And the young husband brought his bride over to my farm. It was a good hunting place. And he sat her on a good vantage point on top of a rock pile where there was under a tree, and it was along a path where the deer were known to travel. And then he went about a quarter mile away to take up his hunting position separate from hers. And his bride sat on the rock pile for about 15 minutes. And a large buck deer came walking along the path, and the bride aimed and fired and brought down a trophy buck. This is the first and last time that she ever went hunting with her husband. She thought the entire experience was not very challenging and couldn't understand what men ever got out of hunting or why it took them so long to come home with a deer. Well, I venture to say most women don't recognize it, but recreational companionship is the second highest emotional need for a man. If his wife doesn't fill this need, he'll be off with his fishing or hunting buddies, and the man will be frustrated until his need is met. Now, deer hunting is not on everyone's favorite list. Dr. Harley, in his book, His Needs, Her Needs, proposes that the couple find recreational activities that they can do together to help them draw close to each other rather than for them to go off in their separate directions. Now, my wife likes to roller skate, and she's really good at it. If I'm careful, I can survive on roller skates with a lot of care. She can roller skate backwards better than I can skate forwards. But I know that roller skating is enjoyable for her, so I've tried to become a better skater so that we can enjoy our time together rather than for us to spend time separate to pursue separate interests. So recreation is a term we use to spend time doing things that we both can enjoy. Now, my wife likes roller skating. I like going to county fairs and state fairs. And some years ago, actually last year as well, and then some years before that, we jumped in a car and we drove to the biggest state fair in the United States up in Minnesota. We went to church in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then went to the state fair. And 100,000 people a day go through that fair for 10 days, over 1 million people a year. And it's so crowded in some of the streets, you can almost walk, if you could walk on top of heads, you could practically walk across the street on top of people. So you got to go at the right time of day and learn. But over the years, and she's gone with me before to the state fair and to county fairs, we've learned to share our recreational activities. God also enjoys recreational activities. What is that word? Recreate, right? Just read through Genesis chapter 1. You'll find a delightful and splendid summary of how God created the earth and everything in it. In Genesis 1 through the 31 verses, about how God created the heaven and earth, how it was without form and void in darkness, was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And we go through it, and we drop down to verse 10, and God saw that it was good, all the things that he was creating. Verse 12, and again he said, and God saw that it was good, all of these things, the trees, the herbs, and so forth. And we go through this. Verse 17, the day and night, and God saw that it was good. And we drop down to verse 21. God saw that it was good with regard to the great sea creatures. If we drop to verse 25 of all of the cattle and beasts of the earth, and God saw that it was good. So creating all of these things was a delight. Verse 31, and God saw everything he had made, and indeed it was very good. And the evening and morning were the sixth day. Well, mankind, like the Creator, likes to make things and increase knowledge. There's a constant thirst for knowledge and desire that's increasing as we draw close to the end of this age. In Daniel 12 and verse 4, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall go to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Well, wives should work to understand and meet their husbands' needs for recreational companionship, and husbands should consider their wife's recreational needs as well. The third emotional need for men is an attractive spouse. Now, Dr. Harley defines attractiveness as, quote, what you do with what you have. We can't dictate the color of our eyes, our height, and a lot of other characteristics that we have. But it's a fact that men are usually visually oriented creatures, and women learn this from an early age to play to men's weaknesses. Men are so predictable. As a result, women are constantly dressing up to look good while men just stand in awe. If you'll notice, there are far more women's clothing stores than men's clothing stores. Far more women's shoe stores than men's shoe stores. And there's a great deal more jewelry sold to women than to men. And we haven't even gotten into cosmetics, lotions, hair care, nail care systems, and on. Most women know that men look for and are proud of an attractive spouse. Men feel a sense of self-worth and accomplishment when their wives take the time and effort to care for themselves. If we go to Song of Solomon, chapter 4 and verse 7, we can read that God wants his church to be attractive and without blemish. So, Song of Solomon 4 and verse 7, I'll read in the New English translation. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There's no blemish in you. We can jump to Ephesians 5 and verse 27. In Ephesians 5:27, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or anything that should be holy, but she should be holy and without blemish. And James 1 and verse 27. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, keep oneself unspotted from the world. Now, it is one of the saddest things that we can find when a woman who does not make good decisions, because it despoils her in Proverbs 11, verse 22. And I'll read this in the King James Version in Proverbs 11:22. As a jewel of gold in a swine's snout, so is a fair woman who is without discretion. You see, poor judgment ruins a person's appearance. God views attractiveness differently than man views attractiveness. In 1 Samuel 16:7, we read, But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as a man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Husbands want their wives to be attracted to them, and God wants his church and the individuals in it to be attractive to him. The fourth need, that emotional need that men have, is domestic support. A man values peace and quiet when he gets home. However, when he arrives at the door, he's often besieged with the problems of the day from his wife and children. As a result, a man places domestic tranquility, peacefulness in the home, as a precious commodity. The husband values it highly. Some couples have learned to prevent this situation from developing a problem by making the first 30 minutes upon arrival at home to be pleasant, to be free of the troubles of the day. And then, especially nowadays, the distribution of household duties is often a bone of contention. So what does the husband do? He pulls out his Bible and he quotes Proverbs 31:27. In Proverbs 31:27, I'll read it in the Common English Bible. She is vigilant over the activities of her household, and she doesn't eat the food of laziness. Well, he quotes that. Well, she's exasperated, so she throws up her hands and wonders how he could be such an uncaring and unhelpful cad. So she pulls out her Bible to Proverbs 31, verse 28, and she throws it right in his face. She says, her children bless her, her husband praises her. Many women act competently, but you surpass them all. Well, so there. Well, then he becomes confused and angry that his hard work all day is not appreciated. So when he gets home, she feels similarly overwhelmed and disrespected. So then he quotes Proverbs 21 and verse 9, Proverbs 21:9. Again in the Common English Bible, he says, better to live on the edge of a roof than with a contentious woman in a large house. You can see where this one's going. And then he quotes Proverbs 27:15, again in the Common English Bible, the constant dripping on a rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Well, we've had some rain lately. In reality, what the wife most likely wanted was some husbandly affection and adult conversation after a day with just kids. At the same time, the husband just wanted to plunk down in an easy chair and vegetate for a few minutes. But a verbal battle develops. She tells him to go ahead and live in the corner of the rooftop, as that's what he thinks about her. Well, how much different would life be if they understood what the other person needed at the time instead of their imaginations and mouths run wild? The fifth characteristic that husbands need, emotional needs, is admiration. Every man wants to be admired by his wife. He wants to be thought of as the king of his own castle, the emperor of his realm. And when a man is admired, he feels respected and he's motivated to do even more. And if women knew this secret about men and how it motivates them, they would find things to admire about their husbands to the point the husband would wear himself to exhaustion just to keep up with their wife's admiration. This trait of admiration, however, must be taught. In Titus 2:4, Paul writes to his compatriot, they, older women, may teach the younger women to be sober, how to love their husbands, and how to love their children. You see, admiration is a component of love. So when a wife shows admiration for her husband, then he's more willing to push himself to meet his wife's needs. I've noticed that for both myself and my daughter's husbands, is that after they got married, it was like they were shot out of a cannon. Now they were really motivated to go make things happen, to earn a better living and provide for their families. Our Creator God is worthy of our admiration. We're called upon to love God in a profound way. We had a sermon on this here some months ago in Deuteronomy 6:5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. We're in Deuteronomy. Let's try verse 11:1. Deuteronomy 11:1. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God. Keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments always. We jump down to verse 13, Deuteronomy 11:13. And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And then it goes on with a long list of blessings that will occur if we do that. And Mark 12 and verse 30. Mark 12:30, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the first commandment. So if we do love God so profoundly, then we're going to admire what God has done for us and is doing for us and what he promises to do for us. So let's take a look now. The men's top 5 emotional needs is physical intimacy, recreational companionship, an attractive spouse, domestic support, and admiration. Dr. Harley, in his book, His Needs, Her Needs, summarizes a less than happy marriage with this statement. If I do not try to meet my spouse's needs and she does not try to meet mine, we may be technically married, but we will not know the happiness and fulfillment that marriage should provide. Well, the message is clear. When husbands and wives don't meet each other's emotional needs, then they are ripe for unfaithfulness and infidelity. But when we do our best to meet our mate's needs, then our lives are more ordered and happy, and our own needs are more likely to be fulfilled. And then similarly, when we do not perform our spiritual responsibilities, we are ripe to be unfaithful to God. And the Bible is replete with admonitions against spiritual and physical fornication. The Bible is also filled with the promise of hope and joy, fulfilling relationships if we follow God's ways. Well, now that we've looked at the top 10 emotional needs of husbands and wives, I want to close with what I call the 10 Commandments of Marriage. And you can follow along with the real 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5, starting in verse 7, or in Exodus 20, starting in verse 1, because we're going to use the real 10 Commandments as a guide. The first commandment, have no other gods before God, meaning have no other husband or wife before you except your own. If everyone invested as much time in marriage as they did planning a summer vacation, their summer vacations would be a lot happier. Number 2, don't make any graven image of God. Translation, treasure the real spouse, not a substitute for your spouse. How often do we see in other people how one spouse keeps busy with activities that take them away from their husband or wife? The third commandment, do not use God's name in vain. Let's put that in the human perspective. Let's, in relationships, speak kindly and properly about your spouse. There's no benefit for the wife to call the husband the old goat, or for the wife to call the husband, or the husband to call the wife the old battle axe. Proverbs 31 says, praise your mate. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Your life will be happier and longer if you marry and stay within the faith. God's plan is spelled out in the Sabbath and the holy days. How delightful it is when you're able to share your life's hopes and dreams with your spouse. In any event, regardless of your marital situation, your Sabbath is your refuge to spend time with God. The fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. In a marital relationship, we must recognize that however we treat our parents is how our children are going to treat us. It also has a bearing on how your children, what they think of God. The sixth commandment, do not murder. We need to uphold our spouse's good name by showing ourselves worthy of that good name. We don't denigrate our relationship by spreading around the mistakes of your mate. The seventh commandment, do not commit adultery. Well, of course, what that means is remaining faithful to God and His truth. As for young people, that means true and faithful to your future spouse before you ever get married. So live a life that you can be pleased to share with your eventual husband or wife. Commandment number 9, do not steal. This means make time for your spouse and treasure that time with your spouse. How many lives have been lived in quiet desperation because one or the other spouse had other things to do? Commandment 9, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. This means to be open and honest with your spouse. A couple who is at ease with each other and are meeting each other's needs will be open and honest with each other. And Commandment 10, do not covet. Be happy with your own spouse and don't interfere with the happiness of other couples. Another way of putting this is, don't touch a hot stove or you will get burned. Consider the consequences of your actions. Thought precedes sin, so then quench the wrong thoughts, put them away, prevent them from becoming a problem. Be happy with your own spouse. Well, today we've covered the top 10 emotional needs for men and women. We've learned how to become better husbands and wives by looking for ways to meet our spouse's needs. We've seen how God fulfills our spiritual needs if we only ask Him and seek Him. And we've looked at our responsibilities before God. And lastly, we've applied the 10 commandments to our married lives. When we follow the admonitions of God, we'll be blessed in our personal temporal lives, and we'll be blessed in our spiritual lives. We can close with Numbers 6, starting in verse 22. In Numbers 6:22. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you, for He is gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them.